The monarch butterfly, one of nature's most beautiful creations. Steve Kriegler captured these images in Madison, Wisconsin. The life of a monarch begins, of course, when its parents mate. A monarch may have several mates in its lifetime. The female will lay 100 eggs at a time, but only on the underside of milkweed leaves, 1 egg per plant.
Let's see if I can figure out which is which now. I went down yesterday to get more food and I got 2 new eggs, which is just like it used to be in the early days. 2 in the hayfield down below us, and 1 in that field by the chestnut orchard. Let's see.
There are eggs on there?
That's that egg.
Yeah.
And so you have to be very careful to keep things like that off, because that's not an egg, and it's something that could turn into a parasite. That also. So I have to be careful that my leaves are clean, because there's the egg, and they would go right for that and make a meal. I welcome questions. I always feel like I'm a little scattered in my thought process here.
Well, no more so than me, Mary Lou.
So here's another one of your just hatched ones, right? Right there. He's
Ooh, interesting.
have a device to open this with. And here are the guys that you saw last weekend that were just hatched. You see him?
Look how huge he is.
Yeah.
If I can zoom in on him. Wow.
And he's still got 3 or 4 more days to go.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, they grow fast, don't they?
They do. They just eat and poop and eat and poop. By the way, the poop is called frass. The word for caterpillar droppings is frass.
Yeah, okay.
How cool is that?
Yeah.
Once these little guys get out there and get to full grown, they'll crawl up the screen of the rearing cage that we use outside, and they will have eaten all they need to eat, and then they go hang upside down on the top of the screen, and they'll form a letter J with their tails at the top and their heads sort of curled up under at the bottom. But then once they're in the J form, it could be a few hours So it's going to be hard to photograph, but if you can catch that, that's a fascinating process, and it's not speedy at all. Then they form this beautiful chrysalis, and I'll get a picture and show you of that. I've described that to you. It's the green with the gold dots around it, gold-colored dots around it.
Yeah.
That they're in that form, the chrysalis form, for about 10 days. And then they emerge as a butterfly, which is another beautiful thing for you to catch on camera.
Right. Right.
It's on this section right there that we want to put the tag. And this is number UGR 775. And I'm just going to hold it between my fingers while I count to 10.
Mary Lou has tagged thousands of monarchs over 40 years, but only 3 have been recovered. Clinging to you.
Yeah, it's. You see how those? I don't know what you call them, but those feet have little. That's how they hold on to. Can you see the little?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what you call it. I'm sure there's a name for that. And now we can go. What? You gotta let go of me. I don't want to hurt you. We can put it on a flower. That goldenrod up here would be really good. Unless you want me to put it on your shirt. Now, oh, that's still not real tight on there. I need to hold that a little more right there. Ah, came back on me. That was not what I had in mind.
Oh, I love that.
There you go.
He loves you. She loves you.
She's a nice, robust one. She might fly off, but she'll warm up a little bit, and there's some sun up behind me. A little sunny spot. I'll say that we just lost the sun now.
We got good footage of her wings. Nice. She's excited now. how did you happen to get interested?
That,
I guess that's a long story.
well, no, it's not really long.
Okay.
We had a very dear friend, an elderly friend up the road, and he was a friend from way back in Woods' family, named Boughton Cobb, and he was a naturalist, retired from the woolen industry, but he retired and came up here, and he tagged monarchs. I don't know how he got started, but that at that time was done through the University of Toronto, done by a very well-run organization headed by Fred Urquhart and his wife Nora. Anyway, Bow Cobb he was elderly and his hands were a little shaky, and he asked me if I would help him. And at that time, I was a home mom with 3 little kids, and that was the perfect thing for us to be doing as a family. So I helped him, and then I just started doing it all on my own after he passed away, and I've done it ever since. And that was in the 70s. And that actually was before the overwintering site in Mexico was discovered. At that time, they didn't know where all these monarchs went. So that whole process of the tagging led to the discovery, helped lead to the discovery of that overwintering site in Mexico, northwest of Mexico City, to an amazing place where they all gather and overwinter in oyamel trees. What was your question? I forgot.
How you got started. That's good. That's pretty thorough.
Okay.
In 2002, Mary Lu and her husband Woods visited a monarch sanctuary in Mexico. These are some of their pictures. Monarchs are endangered. Because of logging, their habitat in Mexico has shrunk from 27 acres to 1 acre. Cold temperatures and storms in Texas have killed many on their way north in the spring. Monarch caterpillars will only eat milkweed, and there's a big shortage of it in the United States, largely due to development and the use of herbicides. In 2013 and 14, Mary Lu didn't see one monarch in Falls Village. This year, 2015, she's raised 14. Maybe the life of the monarch is improving.
The sap house was built, I started putting this together in 1996. It's still not done, so it's 2015. So the big joke was if I live long enough, everything will be done up here, and I'm getting concerned that I probably won't finish everything. But I like to make things that are, time tested and colonial in feel, and hopefully have somebody come in here and say, this is either an old building that's been well kept, or it's an old building that was put together again, or what have you. But that's the beauty of being able to use reclaimed material, and because all these brick came from different projects that I took down from chimneys and walls and such, and a couple of these pieces of stone, like this piece and these pieces, were reclaimed from another. They were curving pieces, and so it's wonderful because you can replace and recycle, all the material. Actually, the flooring in here came from another project that had been discontinued, so I was able to take that. That. So, and like I said, this timber came from an old barn up by the reservoir. Well, the rest of these timbers were all hand hewn out of stuff off my folks' property.
Yeah.
And these were old. A friend of mine runs a salvage business, and we take old structures down. And these were old gutter hangers from an old house up in New York State. So, everything can be repurposed and reused. Let's see if I can put a couple of pieces in here to get it going a little. So it might get a little smoky. Is if you can get the wood is on the smaller side, it burns faster. And this is the warming pan for the sap. So this is where it all starts. Where it all starts is you have your firebox, which is called the arch, and the lid, the top of the arch, the top of the stove is the bottom of your boiling pan. And the only thing that keeps that pan from warping, twisting, or scalding is the little bit of fluid that's inside there. And so this pan is a warming pan, and it's a feeder pan. So you put your raw sap in from outside, put it in. It steams underneath here, so it gets somewhat warm. And then you have a trickle feed. You want to try to keep a trickle feed you can increase it. But at this point, we want to keep it as light as possible so that we're not putting too much fluid in there and then taking away our boil. But we want to maintain enough fluid going in so that we're not evaporating more than we're putting back in, and then run the risk of burning the pans. And so it goes into this channel, this raw sap, and heats up. And actually, we may have to close the door because you can see the boils going down.
Okay.
But the raw sap starts to get colorized here as it heats up. The sugars caramelize, and then there's a little channel in here that it migrates into this canal, runs down this chamber, migrates into this one, and then this is where we draw off on this location. And so theoretically, this is where we're going to test to see if we have syrup. And the hygrometer will tell us when it starts to float up and down, and then that's when the fun begins. We start drawing it off, and we put it in the filter press, and let that run through the filter, and then we'll put it in the bottles, and then we're all good to go.
Good.
And that's not a lot to it. Just a lot of time involved.
Yeah.
I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring some sap in, and I'll pour it in here. What I have left, and we'll keep the rest in here. So this is the last of the sap that I can extract from the containers out there because it's frozen solid. So we will put this in here. This is raw sap right from the trees. It was collected maybe a couple days ago. And the idea is that what we draw off as syrup, we need to replace as quickly as possible into the pan. And if you look over here, Eric, the bubbles, I don't know if you can get it, but the bubbles are starting to change. in here. And they're going to get really weird very shortly. Almost gets like snakeskin. They start growing in on themselves. And so a lot of the old timers, you know, they didn't have the high-tech hydrometer, and they would go by what they called sheeting. Is that they would take a scoop or so, stick it through, lift it up, and if it sheeted as opposed to drip, if it all went down kind of in an even plane, they would say that's syrup. And a lot of times they were pretty close. You know, they might have been off by a little bit, but nowadays, if you get a hydrometer, there's no guessing. This is a hydrometer, which measures the density of fluids. And this one's made for syrup. And what we're looking for is when it floats up is that you want it to be at a hot test where it's at 212 degrees, you want it at like 58, 59 Brix. And that'll float, and this is a cup, it'll float in the syrup like that, and then you know that it's syrup, and that's the time to draw it off. So we will try it on here, and I don't even think it's going to register at all. So you put your cup in, scoop it up, and set it right there so that way it stays warm. And you lightly set this in, and that should float if it's anywhere near syrup, but it doesn't. You can hear it go. But if it were near syrup, it would start doing something like this and bouncing up, and then you'd want it right at that red line. That's when you know it's time to draw off. It would sit there like that. But right now, the density is far too light. But it may look, you know, it's starting to get a color in it, but it's got to come off in a sheet. So. There's not a lot to it. I mean, you could drive yourself crazy by reading all the technical manuals and stuff. You know, and a lot of people have no idea how this comes about. It's actually, I work over at Infinity Hall in Norfolk a few times a month, and the last night I worked over there, I brought some sap over. I brought a mason jar of sap, and it was very sweet, and I gave it to a couple people, and they were tasting it. And one of the fellows at the box office, Bruce, who's a sweet guy, he's from Southern California, he was like, well, what is this, moonshine? He's like, no, it's sap from the tree. He goes, well, what's that mean? I said, it goes into maple syrup. And he thought you just tapped the maple trees and got syrup out as a final product. And it wasn't a joke. It was just that never dawned on him that there was more work to do to it. So I told him I'll bring him some syrup over, but he enjoyed the sap. So the native Indians are the ones that turned the colonials, showed the colonials how to make maple syrup. And whether or not it was a maple syrup or not, it's hard to say. But if you think about the Indians at that time period, they had been making it for God knows how, you know, hundreds of years. They didn't have steel, iron, or any other metal type, copper or anything that they could boil it in. So they would make birch bark or wooden bark vats, and they would heat stones up and drop the stones or place the stones into the sap. And the stones would heat the sap eventually and turn it in. So I've never seen this process done, but I guess they do it at the Institute of Indian Studies down in Washington, Connecticut. I would love sometime to see it. I guess I could Google it and see if it comes up on if there's a video or not. But how much time we have to put in to do this over an open flame? How much time did they have? And then how did they fish the stones out? You know, yeah. And it must have been an unruly process at best, but they did end up making some kind of a sugar that was a block, and supposedly the Indians, certain times of the year, that's what they would live on, because the hunting, their hunting season, the game was all disposed of, and there were no vegetables, no fruits, no wild picking, so they would just have these blocks of sugar that they would just gnaw on, that they produce. So yeah, they're the culprits that made us get into this thing. probably a mixed blessing. It might be their revenge on us. But, and now, do you remember Mabel Halloway?
Oh, that was one of Albert and Dot's best friends.
Mabel was amazing.
Yeah.
I loved Mabel. She was a delight. The last time I talked to her, it was before she got ill, towards the end. But I was driving by and I saw her outside, tooted to her, and she waved. And I got a little further down the road, and I said, you know what? I should stop and just talk to her, just to say hi. And we went and talked, and I'm glad I did, because that was the last time I saw her. But she was sitting she was sitting on her stoop and the front door open, barefoot, and she was cracking black walnuts with a carpenter's hammer. And it was, to this day, it's there in my mind. And she was amazing. She was a great lady, and she talked all those sugar maples on the road, and that stretch on the mountain road, which is delightful. That there's a lane, you're driving.
Cathedral. I think of that as a cathedral.
Her father planted those, and it was after the Civil War, so it would have been, it was 1870s, 1880s, and he planted all those along the road there. So they're all, now, maybe 130, 140 years old, somewhere in that range, which is pretty neat. There you go. You've got syrup right there. So see how much higher that's standing up than what it was before. Yeah. So we're right where we need to be. So that's the sap coming in. Now we're going to draw off. I don't know if you can get a good.
Yeah, fine.
That's what that looks like in the pan. And now we're going to go through the filter with it.
Okay.
We'll go up, put it into our filter right up here. Multiple plated paper filters. And we pour that through. Filtering is the most important part, because you want a nice, you don't want cloudy and items floating around in your syrup.
What are some of the impurities that are in the maple syrup at this point that you're filtering out?
Oh, they'll call that sugar sand, niter, and it's debris that's gotten in the sap from various ways. And the other thing is that the sap is mostly water, and so the tree pulls the water from the groundwater, and so any minerals that are in the ground actually go through the tree at certain levels. And so as we draw it off and heat it up, those are released into the syrup. So it's not going to hurt you if it's in the syrup, but it's nice to filter that out, because I'll show you, we'll pull a filter paper out after this one, and you'll see what we filter out. Make sure I get the right one. I don't know what I have in here, maybe 4 paper filters and then a wool filter. And the paper filters are the first line of defense to catch the impurities. So you can see there's a little bit. There's actually not as much as you would have thought. How's that look? And the key is not to pinch your finger. we had all the stone. Dusty Blast dug all this out. And we put all the stone up where you're standing. I just tossed it all down here so I can work with it. So it's a little unorganized, but it works. The object is not to lift the bare minimum of stone of that. Use its leverage to support itself. I don't know, did I send you a photo of the chimney I did over in Salisbury?
No.
I didn't send you one of, it was a firebox before and after photos? Oh, I should.
I don't believe so.
Yeah, it was fun. I was able to use, they were remodeling a house and they had a existing brick fireplace with simple marble surround around it. And it was, you know, it worked well. But they wanted to countrify the home a little bit, make it look rustic, so they brought some beams in and they were going to make the room look more like a tavern than a contemporary living room. And so I thought about it and they said, you know, we want something that just fits and is unique and is artful and is something that would focus your attention and bring you into the room as well as being functional. So I drew up a couple different sketches, got a feel for it. Figured, why don't I use reclaimed stone, meaning stone that was from other projects and had other uses, and perhaps we could use a minimum amount of stone so you don't have a lot of stone filling it in. So to cover a space in a wall that was maybe 6 feet by 9 feet in height, I used 7 stones. And I cut them all up in the garage, worked them all up, and then did an infill pattern, and it came out stunning.
Yeah.
And very simple, easy to install, great piece of artwork and functional, and just something that's like not what you'd normally see.
Yeah.
And you're using reclaimed material, you know, material that had another repurposed maybe, something like that, and it was quite enjoyable. I can move it. We'll get it. Flip it just into this face. This will be the top, that'll be the face, that'll be the bottom. And then we'll just kind of persuade her to go down the ramp. Every stone is laid for this long way back. If you look at all this, you have the face, the longest part of the stone in, face, longest part of the stone in, face, longest part, face, face, everything back in. That way if there's ever any movement, it's going to all be integral and locked together. The wall has a slight batter backwards, back into the bank, so that way if there is any movement, it's going to want to implode as opposed to explode. Far better way to build. Getting at that last half inch. Have you gotten an image of the front of it?
Yeah. Right now I'm just grabbing an image of you.
Yeah, that'll break your camera.
No.
Alright, so this is one that we're going to fix. This one's from 1810. So the shoulder and the head broke off, but fortunately it's one piece, so we'll clean all this off. Somebody had fixed this once before with some type of like a plaster repair. And the idea about repairs, and this actually shows that it held true, is that what your repair is, you don't want to make it stronger than the stone. You want, if something's going to happen to the stone again, i.e. vandalism or tree damage or lawnmower damage, you want the repair to break in the same spot that it broke originally, so that you're not doing more damage to the stone. So your repair should be kind of the sacrificial element again. So what we put on is an epoxy, and then tomorrow we'll come back and crack fill it. And somebody did patch this to hide the epoxy. And the epoxy is strong, but it has less flexural strength than the stone does. So that'll give before the stone does, unless somebody really jams it in here and then they shatter it, but that shouldn't happen. So I'll get set up, I'll get some tools, we'll clean this off, clean that off, and on a day like today, the epoxy is perfect for doing epoxy. It's not so good for doing mortar work because it's so hot and dry. But the epoxy will set up really nicely. The chemical reaction will go because we're in the 90s. So should be a good set. So if I can mix all the epoxy at once, we can quick set this one and scoot over there and set that one, and then we'll be all good to go. So we'll do some preliminary stuff. And this chisel I'm using is a 19th century carving chisel. I was fortunate to get a whole 5-gallon bucket of them years and years ago. You can still get modern ones, but these are all handmade. They're really nice. They have a nice head to it, and they hold the sharpness rather nicely. That's a start on that one. Let's see what we have up here. And always, when you're working on these stones, always work in, never work out to the corner. And that's all some kind of a cement material that I'm removing there. It's not stone. Some people will take grinders out and they'll resurface everything, and it's not such a good idea. Neil and Eric, Neil.
Hi. Dad, can I try it on the back?
I got it for this one. All right. Don't scratch the stone, they're very light.
What side do you do it?
You don't dig, just make it flush. What's up?
I forgot the drawing in the
That's it.
It's at school.
See those where they split the stone from the ledge? Those are drill marks. And they popped it apart, and then this whole dimpling was done by hand tools just to get it down to a level surface. And then this you can see where they use tools and they brought it a little more formal, and then they bring to the front, which was the presentation side. 1808. When they originally carved these, they carved them on a flat surface on the table, about waist height. And you want to use a light brush, because you don't want to damage the stone. And it'll make a big difference now, but it'll make a much larger difference in give it about a week or two.
Oh, yeah.
Really light now.
The American Revolution. We had 25,000 casualties. The Civil War, 625,000 Americans died. World War I, we lost 116,000 Americans. World War II, 405,000 Americans were killed. The Korean War, 36,000 Americans perished. And the Vietnam War, 58,000 Americans lost their lives. Every Memorial Day for the past 45 years, Betty Taberski has placed American flags on the grave sites of service members in Falls Village cemeteries. Recently, she's been assisted by Kent Allen, overseer of the Falls Village cemeteries. Their first stop is the Music Mountain Cemetery, also known as Barrack Mountain Cemetery.
Whatever it was, stuck. And they didn't give me any medication specifically for that.
I got the what?
The cart.
Okay.
Betty and Kent's next stop is the Lower City Cemetery on the Undermountain Road.
No.
Okay.
This is Aaron Babcock's final resting place.
There we go. He died 14 days after mustard, age 34, and I would assume it would have been from disease. Or accident. A lot of diseases killed these guys.
Civil War.
Civil War, yes.
I'll take your old ones.
What?
I'll take your old ones.
Oh, thank you. This is my buddy. This is my flag buddy.
No more new ones.
How long have you been helping me? 5 years?
Gee, I don't
Good
even
5
remember.
years. I know.
It seems
Good
longer. Yeah,
Yeah, good 5 years.
seems longer than 5
7.
years.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. My helper. He makes sure the old lady doesn't fall down and hurt herself.
It's mutual, I think, at this time.
Yeah, we help each other.
Now we pause for Roswell Route.
This is the 2nd Connecticut Heavy Artillery. A lot of boys from Litchfield were in this regiment. And there's a big story about that. They fought at Cold Harbor, and I'll get into that later. But there's a lot of boys from Litchfield County, and Canaan included, that went into the war. And a lot of them died, too. At Cold Harbor, especially.
Betty paid special tribute to George Mansfield.
George Mansfield. He enlisted at the beginning of the war, 8/20/62 in the 19th Connecticut Volunteer Infantry Regiment, later designated the 2nd Connecticut Heavy Artillery. He fought was wounded in the leg at Cold Harbor. He was wounded in the leg at the Battle of Fisher Hill. He had his thumb shot off at either the Battle of Petersburg or Sailors Creek, Virginia. He was discharged for disability at 8/9/65 and went to a hospital in New Haven where they took care of veterans and patched them up and got them better before they returned home. And on the way home, He was in a steam engine train and it blew up and he was scalded to death. After all those battles that he was in, really vicious battles, the poor man's coming home. He had been in the war from the start and he gets killed by being scalded to death. So our hearts go out to this veteran, special man.
High up on Canaan Mountain, we visit the tiny Steep Road Cemetery.
Well, they have a couple of them up here, right, Betty?
Yeah, just two.
Ebenezer Barnes. A tree branch came down on it.
Back on the Undermountain Road, we're at the Undermountain Cemetery, also known as Haskins Cemetery. It's where Edward Coxwell is buried.
He enlisted in the 13th Regiment Infantry, Connecticut Volunteers, and he was mustered in 1/11/62. He was wounded 9/19/64 at the Battle of Winchester. The loss of the regiment was 6 killed, 41 wounded, and 29 captured. He died 108 days later at 1/1/65 at age 31. And I think there's something really beautiful here. His gravestone reads, "Watch angels over this lonely grave. Guard well his patriot dust."
Kent goes to the tombstone of John Whitney, who fought in the American Revolution.
In death's cold arm, to he, we hope, is something. Foul is gone, to live with God on high. 1807 he passed away.
This is the entrance to the Sand Hill Cemetery. The first veteran we encounter is Kent Allen's father, Leslie Allen.
He was born in 1918, small town kid from East Canaan, and he went into World War II in 1942. He was in the Signal Corps, and because he was a country boy, he knew how to shoot a weapon, unlike many of the city boys. So they put him in the Signal Corps. And when he was training at Fort Devon, they found out that he had a skill in decoding and especially understood the Japanese katakana, which is a type of language that they use, more informal than formal. So he was assigned to the Pacific, and his first assignment, they sent my dad with a troop of New Zealand troops to Port Moresby, New Guinea. And that's where he learned his jungle survival and training. And his duty was to be dropped or to walk behind enemy lines and locate their communication points. And he would call in either air bombardment or ship bombardment to take care of the radio stations, or in extreme cases they would actually land a raiding party there. So he was under quite hazardous duty. He was chosen because of his skill in survival, but also in Japanese, to be sent behind enemy lines, and he was delivered by sub to Fort Fushimi in Japan. And They were carrying on negotiations because the Japanese Imperial Army wanted to negotiate a peace. They knew it was over. And so my dad was in the process of doing that particular chore when we dropped our bomb on Hiroshima. Well, my dad was in the Japanese Imperial Army camp, and they were all mobilized for first aid. So my dad and his Japanese cohorts walked from Fort Fushimi, I guess it's about 10, 12 miles, to Hiroshima, and gave first aid to the survivors. And Japan at that time had no medicine, so the best that they could do was put cold water and gauze on the radiation burns. They had no idea of what it was, but so I can actually say my father was in Japan when we bombed it. The peace negotiations that he was attempting to do obviously never came to fruition.
His name was Les.
Yep, Leslie.
Leslie.
Yep. We all called him Les.
This is a really sad one. Solomon was in the infantry, and he was in the Connecticut Heavy Artillery, the heavies as they called them. A lot of Litchfield County boys went in that, participated in that regiment. He was in Cold Harbor, Petersburg, Fisher's Hill, and he was captured at the Battle of Cedar Creek in Virginia on October 19th, 1869, and taken to the Confederate prison in Salisbury, North Carolina. At that time, the South was losing the war, and the supplies and food, the Southerners were starving, and they certainly didn't have any food or supplies or medical supplies for prisoners of war. Men died by the hundreds every week of extreme danger, disease, and lack of shelter. The prison at Salisbury was on the grounds of an old cotton mill containing a large 4-story brick building. They were supposed to hold 2,000 men. By the end of the war, there were 10,321 prisoners in there. The horrors of this prison are described in the book Portals to Hell. So Solomon had a real tough time. This tombstone was cracked, and Karl Munson fixed it. And he knew I felt about this man, and I was so sad when the tombstone was broken for many years. He fixed it, and the neat part was he called me in when he was going to do it. He let me put some of the cement in it when he put it together, and it was very moving. It meant a lot to me. It was really nice of Karl. Very emotional. I always say that someday, when I go on the other side, I'm going to meet these guys and put the names and the faces together. No women so far. Oaks.
The next cemetery on our rounds is St. Patrick's Catholic Cemetery off the Dublin Road.
This doesn't need much work. That's usually about it for these, for this cemetery. Okay.
The final stop on our Memorial Day observance is Grassy Hill Cemetery, where 92 veterans are buried, including 10 officers from the American Revolution. And years ago, your sons used to help you.
Yes.
Your 3 sons.
I have 3 wonderful sons, and they were my first helpers, and they helped me from the time I took over in 1970 until they went off to college. And they helped me whenever they could, and it was a family affair. And we loved it, and they loved it, and I thought it was a great way to teach them respect for the flag, respect for the veterans, respect for your country. And they were great, and it was a lot of fun, and they were very interested in it, so it was a great family experience.
Well, thank you, Betty.
You're welcome.
Thank you for doing this. It's been great.
My honor. My honor.
It's moving.